Hello, I'm Stephen Koprince, Managing Partner of Koprince Law LLC. And today I want to talk about some potential changes at the VA that could affect service-disabled, veteran-owned small businesses and others. The VA is considering so-called tiered evaluations to address concerns that SDVOSBs and veteran-owned small businesses, or VOSBs, may not always offer what the VA says is fair and reasonable pricing, even when two or more veteran-owned businesses compete for a contract. In a session at the National Veterans Small Business Engagement on December 5, 2017, a panel of VA acquisition leaders described the potential tier evaluation process. Now, it's hard to argue that the VA isn't entitled to fair and reasonable pricing, but judging from the reaction in the room at that event, some SDVOSBs and VOSBs may wonder whether tiered evaluations are in fact an effort to circumvent Kingdomware. The VA panel consisted of Tom Lenny, Executive Director of the Small and Veteran Business Programs, Jan Fry, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Acquisition and Logistics, and Robert Fleck, the Chief Counsel of the Office of General Counsel. Mr. Lenny, who spoke first, said that the Kingdomware decision has been good for veterans and good for the VA. He pointed out that the VA's annual SDVOSB spending rose significantly following Kingdomware. That's good news, of course. But Mr. Fry said that when Kingdomware was decided in June 2016, the VA was worried that the decision could, in some cases, result in higher prices and lengthier procurement processes. The VA doesn't currently have any hard data about whether that's proven true on a macro level, but it has commissioned a study to evaluate it. In the meantime, Mr. Lenny said there is anecdotal evidence of cases where the VA has paid what he said were excessive prices to award to veteran-owned companies. The VA hopes that this is a small problem in a few cases, not a widespread problem, Mr. Lenny said. But apparently anticipating the need for policy changes to address the issue, the VA is considering adopting a tiered evaluation system in some procurements. Under a tiered evaluation, a solicitation would be set aside for SDVOSBs or VOSBs, but other companies, including large businesses, would also be able to submit proposals. The agency would start by evaluating proposals of the top tier, in most cases likely SDVOSB, since they have the top preference in the VA's priority scheme. If the VA didn't receive fair and reasonable pricing at that tier, the VA would go down to the next tier, probably VOSBs, and continue down the chain until a fair and reasonable offer was available to accept. The three speakers said that using a tiered evaluation approach would prevent procurement delays, or at least make them less noticeable. As it stands now, if an acquisition has been set aside for SDVOSBs, but no SDVOSB offers a fair and reasonable price, the VA has no choice but to cancel and resolicit. Mr. Lenny said there have been cases where the VA has solicited the same acquisition 2, 3, or 4 times before receiving fair and reasonable pricing. A tiered evaluation would eliminate this problem by allowing the contracting officer to simply go to the next tier instead of resoliciting. The speakers indicated that tiered evaluations wouldn't be used in all acquisitions. Mr. Lenny said the approach likely wouldn't be used in acquisitions involving complex technical proposals because the VA would be unlikely to receive offers from companies whose proposals might never be considered. On the other hand, the VA seems to think the approach could work well in less complex acquisitions, particularly when price is a critical factor. As I mentioned, it's hard to argue the VA isn't entitled to fair and reasonable pricing. Fair pricing is, of course, a bedrock principle of federal procurement. But judging from the mood in the room at the event, the VA is going to have some work to do if it is to convince SDVOSBs and VOSBs that this initiative, if it comes to pass, isn't an attempt to circumvent the Supreme Court's Kingdomware decision. It's worth asking whether the VA is jumping the gun. After all, the VA admits that it doesn't yet have any hard data and is relying on anecdotal evidence. So is the VA proposing a solution before it even knows for sure whether there's a real problem? But assuming there is occasion for a solution like tiered evaluations, one key consideration is this: how is fair and reasonable pricing determined? Now, one of the speakers suggested that if the VA receives pricing that is lower than the prices submitted by SDVOSBs, the contracting officer might use that as evidence that the SDVOSB pricing wasn't fair and reasonable. Hopefully that's not how it would work. There's a big difference between higher pricing and unreasonable pricing. As one audience member pointed out, if reasonableness is judged based on the pricing submitted by non-veteran offers, including large businesses, many SDVOSBs and VOSBs could have a tough time competing. Now, I give the VA leadership credit for coming to a public forum to discuss issues like these. And I'm willing to wait and see the details before passing judgment on the proposal should the VA decide to implement it. But the VA must understand that the SDVOSB and VOSB community watched for years as the VA fought tooth and nail to evade the statutory preferences under 38 U.S.C. 8127. With that history, some veterans are understandably skeptical that efforts like these are anything other than an attempt to circumvent the Supreme Court's ruling. If the VA is going to implement tiered evaluations or similar tools, the agency will have some convincing to do. Stay tuned.